Welcome back to Influencer Insider, the show where we speak to industry professionals and dive beyond the surface to see how they really made it to the top. As you may know, I recently had my master's in law, but today I am not the lawyer that we are talking about. We have on the show today with us Georgina Delaney. So, Georgina, welcome to the show and please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Szandra. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Georgina Delaney and I'm a legal consultant with Faisal Salem Advocates and Legal Consultants. I specialize in family law and I'm a solo mom myself.
Perfect. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about divorce. I have been hearing a lot that in the UAE recently, a lot of people have been getting divorced. And I have a very good friend of mine, actually, who is currently going through a divorce. And what she's most worried about is the custody of her children. How can we advise her about that?
Sure, Szandra. Well, certainly you have hit the nail on the head that it is a very busy time for us divorce lawyers. There seems to be a lot in the way of divorces in the UAE right now. Mm-hmm. In terms of your specific question for your friend, in terms of custody, this really is one of the most emotionally triggering aspects of any divorce.
Yeah, when the children are involved, it gets very sensitive.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I always, I encourage my clients to try to make it a child-centric divorce if they can at all. So put aside their own ideas, prejudices, etc. Or, sometimes parties are hurt and that can cause a lot of anger, but if they can park that and just think of the children and try to come to an amicable agreement, that is always the best solution, and that's the best outcome for both the parents and the children.
So when you first start, you always advise them to try to amicably agree to all the aspects.
Absolutely, mm-hmm. Absolutely. And every case is different. Every family situation is different. For example, we have a lot of people in aviation here in the UAE, pilots, cabin crew, etc., where something like shared custody can be difficult, to have a set routine. Whereas if they can work out something that suits their particular family, then both parents can still have generous access to the children. And that minimizes the disruption to the children from the fallout from the divorce as well.
So we're obviously living in a Muslim country, but not everybody is a Muslim here. So what would be the difference between Muslims and non-Muslims when it comes to divorce and child custody?
Wow, that's an excellent question, Szandra. And, one that people are not very sure of the answers to. And a lot of time that can also cause stress because perhaps your friend is, non-Muslim and it was automatic shared custody. And then you're Muslim and you're not sure how that's going to play out for you. So the best thing is to get professional advice, so you know exactly where you stand in terms of your specific situation. It's not just about religion. For example, the law, the default for Muslims is sole custody to the mother with visitation for the father. Under Sharia law, it is deemed that the mother is the nurturer and the father the provider. Hence, the mother generally gets sole custody. That, as I said, that is the default. However, in some cases, if the mother is deemed unfit, then that is a different situation. And the father has the right then to take a case for shared custody or sole custody of the children, if he deems that that's in the best interest of the children. Whether it's Muslim or non-Muslim divorce, the court always defaults to what's in the best interest of the children. So for example, for non-Muslims, the law is 50-50 shared custody. However, that does not always play out. Like I mentioned previously, if you have shift workers, we have a lot of parents these days who work in Saudi and commute back at the weekends. We also have issues where there can be physical abuse, where it's not in the best interest of the children to spend a lot of time with that particular parent. There may be addiction issues, substance issues. So all of these factors are taken into consideration when the court determines how the custody should be assessed.
And until what age is that? Is that until 18 or 21, or how does it work here?
Okay, so again, for non-Muslim cases, the law states that it's 50-50 shared custody until the children are 18. Once the children are 18, they are no longer minors, so custody is not an issue. For Muslim cases, it is also until 18. However, the child can decide when the child is 15 years old whether or not they would like to reside with the other parent.
Okay, and who normally pays the maintenance for the child and when people get divorced? Is it the father, or does it depend again on Muslim, non-Muslim?
Again, it's a case-by-case basis. Slightly different for Muslims and non-Muslims. So, like I mentioned before, under Sharia law, it is generally deemed that the father should be the provider. Therefore, it will mostly, the financial burden will fall back on the father. And what the courts evaluate is the salary, the wealth of the father, whether they have a lot of assets, how much they earn, etc. That will determine how much child maintenance is approved by the court. Other factors also come into consideration, such as how many children. For example, when it comes to rental allowance, if somebody has one child, they need a smaller property than somebody with 3 or 4 children. So generally, logic will prevail in these instances. In the cases of non-Muslims, especially if both parties are working, they both have income, then the courts will assess the overall financial situation of the parties. Then they may say, okay, if the father earns 70,000 per month and the mother earns 30,000 per month, then they may do a split. The father may be responsible for 70% of the rent and the mother 30%. But all in all, the situation will be adjudicated fairly.
And what if the spouse doesn't actually pay child maintenance? Do they go to jail?
So that's a great question, Szandra. If there has been a verdict from the court, the parties are divorced, it has been determined who has custody and how much is to be paid to that custodian, then the short answer is yes, potentially they can go to jail. So what happens if the party does not pay? The judge will give them an opportunity to find the funds. Then after 30 days, if they cannot make this payment, there will be punitive steps taken. So things like freezing of their bank accounts, a travel ban, then an arrest warrant, and then jail. Yes.
So in short, yes, they might go to jail.
Yes, once you have a verdict and you have an execution case, an execution case means that you have enforced that verdict, then you have all of those rights available to you. And the courts here are very agile in terms of enforcement.
Okay. And you mentioned abuse earlier. Is that something common that we see nowadays? I mean, there's all forms. I mean, physical abuse, emotional abuse, cheating, hiding things. How do you see that? Recently, have you had a lot of cases which have abuse in them?
Unfortunately, yes, Sandra. You know, it's all too common at the moment. I see physical abuse. I see a lot of emotional abuse, coercive control. Then in some extreme cases, you see child abuse, which is extremely sad situation. So yeah, there's financial abuse, of course. So there can be a lot. varying forms of abuse. And normally that is what drives people to come to me and say, okay, enough. I need to get out of this situation.
And does the court sort of take that into consideration when they're, coming up with the verdict? I mean, does it actually affect it a lot? Do they lose custody?
Absolutely. It affects a lot of things. Financially, the person who has been harmed, they can claim damages for the harm. Sometimes the harm can be so great that we will also have to open a criminal case to ensure that if it's physical abuse or child abuse, that ceases with immediate effect. And yes, if somebody has a case against them for physical abuse, child sexual abuse, etc., then naturally this will have a negative impact on their custody.
Makes sense. Okay, let's maybe talk about something a bit lighter.
Sure.
How about pets when it comes to a divorce? Who gets the pets, and are they treated as property or are they treated as humans? How does it work here in the UAE?
Yeah, so pets are essentially family members as well. And this is something that is becoming more common here. Mm-hmm. I've had maybe 4 or 5 cases already this year for cats and dogs and the custody of those pets. And it's very, very important where people do not have children. Essentially, these pets are their babies. And we have, often the courts will even come up with an arrangement where the custody of those pets can be shared.
And do they also have visitation rights?
They do in some circumstances, yes. It depends on whether we can come to an amicable agreement between the parties, whether the court decides what access, or the court decides that sole custody of those pets should go to one of the parties. Okay. For example, if one party had those pets before the marriage, then generally they will be the ones that will get the custody of the pets, but the other party may get access.
Okay, interesting. And when we're speaking about abuse, as you mentioned earlier, is cheating, infidelity actually punishable by law?
Yes, it is. That's the short and fast answer, Szandra. However, the burden of proof is extremely high in infidelity cases. So often I will have a party come to me and say, my husband is cheating. I have all this proof. I have screenshots of the WhatsApp messages. I have pictures on Instagram, etc. What can we do? And I often say, okay, do you want to stay in this marriage, or do you want to separate? Is this a deal breaker for you? Because I advise the party that a lot of times it is not worth the emotional cost of going down the road and pursuing a criminal case for infidelity. Now, that being said, it's again a very, very triggering event in anyone's life to uncover the fact that their spouse has been cheating on them. So the party that is harmed will often just want to, I suppose, for want of a better word, get revenge, and they may want to pursue that. And in that case, yes, of course, we will help them to pursue that. We will accompany them to the police station to open the file. We will translate all the evidence that they have, submit it to the court, and yes, these cases will go then in front of public prosecution to be determined further.
Okay, and now recently in the UAE, I've heard that the law allows for partners to actually live together without marriage. How would it work in that case in terms of separation or infidelity? Is that covered by the law?
Well, in terms of, I think this is a really positive advancement in the law here, that parties can live together. And now what we see a lot more are unmarried couples having children. So, for example, if you're not married but you have 1 or 2 young children since this law came into effect, then you are entitled to your rights being financial support, your rights being custody or visitation to the children. So in that particular instance, you have the exact same rights as married people.
So I have a few friends I know of, and they actually stay married out of convenience because they're afraid of going through the process of divorce, especially when it comes to children. So what would you say to someone who's afraid of getting divorced because they're afraid to lose custody of their child, or maybe just staying married out of sheer convenience?
So what I would say in that instance, Sandra, is to take an hour out of your life and have a consultation with a lawyer. Come see me, and then I will set you straight on the facts, what you're entitled to, what your rights are, etc. Because a lot of time people stay married out of fear. There's a lot of fear here in the UAE because we have a lot of expatriates here. They are not familiar with the laws. They don't feel comfortable because it's not their home country. They've heard, rumors and some stories that perhaps sounded scary, or people who haven't been able to manage financially, because obviously it is a high cost of living here. But that being said, I think knowledge is power. At least get the advice. A lot of what you hear is not actually true or may not apply to you. And you need to know exactly what applies to your particular family situation. Once you get that advice, then perhaps you would be empowered to take the next step and move forward with the divorce.
Okay, and you mentioned rumors. Let's talk a little bit about that. Defamation is a big deal in the UAE. So, how does that come into play when, for example, somebody shares their personal experience as they're going through the divorce, or maybe posts online about it? Is that something that the courts look at?
Absolutely. And this is something that I advise all of my clients. Be extremely careful because it's a very, very sensitive time. And sometimes, the other party is waiting for that opportunity. Perhaps they feel that, they feel vulnerable. Especially if you're the party that has applied for the divorce, asked for the divorce, they're hurting, then they will be looking for an opportunity, and posting something online can be that opportunity. So don't post anything personal. Don't post anything, about your children, your divorce, etc. It's best to keep things very low key.
Makes sense. What about when only one party is on the title deed? How do the courts go about that? Do both parties have to be on it? And does it make a difference again if you are married or not married?
Okay, so names on title deeds, again, a number of factors come into play. So, for example, is the property the family home or not? Or is it just another asset that one party has? So the advice that I give to most people is, if you're purchasing an asset, if you're purchasing a property and you're married, ensure that both names go on the title deed. It can be very difficult if just one name is on the title deed to gain a portion of that asset. What you would need to do is then be able to prove very clearly to the courts that you contributed financially towards this asset. So, for example, transfers coming from you or your family, a trail of you transferring that money to your spouse at the time the property was purchased, etc., etc. There would have to be very, very clear evidence there to show that you contributed to the property if your name is not on the title deed. However, if you can prove this and your name is not on the title deed, then don't be afraid to pursue your portion of that asset.
And does it make a difference if you're married and your name is not on the title deed?
No, it doesn't matter, married or not married. That that remains the same.
Okay. And what would you say is the most common reason that people are getting divorced these days?
I think the most common reason when parties come to me, what I see is that they are not a team. They are not in this marriage together, working together for any common goals. So I will get a lot of people, come to see me, women in particular, and they will have no idea how much their husband earns. They will have no idea how much savings they have. They will not have any visibility on any of the finances. So things like this, it's very, very important that you're aware of what's happening within your own marriage and within your own household.
And does that make it more difficult when they don't know what assets the other person has?
Well, we can request all of these via the court if the case goes to litigation. So, for example, we can ask for a court order to request a salary certificate from the husband's employer. We can request a letter to address the DLD, the Dubai Land Department, to check what assets the other party has here in the UAE. We can check with the RTA. So we can do all of these checks, but it's much better if you can bring this to the table from the outset, so you have visibility.
So, as there are a lot of expats within the UAE, how would jurisdiction play a role? Like, if we have a British expat in the UAE, would you recommend that they divorce via the UAE Sharia laws, or should they go back to their home country and do it there?
So, again, it's case by case. So, it depends on their individual circumstances. For example, in the UAE, the courts are extremely agile. So the length of time it takes to get divorced here in the UAE is probably faster than most jurisdictions that I've encountered. So as it's such a stressful time, that at least minimizes the emotional cost of the divorce. In terms of custody, if there's assets, then these are things that I need to sit with the individual party and advise them, okay, for example, if you want sole custody, then this is what you can get in your home country, this is what you will get in the UAE. If there are a lot of assets, for example, back in the UK, but you don't have any assets here in the UAE, then perhaps it may be better to do your divorce in the UK. What I'm actually advising a lot of, specifically for UK clients at the moment, is because it takes a long time to get through the UK courts, and it is also very, very expensive. So I often have people coming to me going, I started my divorce in the UK. I am now out of money. Can I transfer the jurisdiction? It's extremely difficult to try to change jurisdiction halfway through. So again, it's about getting that knowledge up front before you file. So a lot of them, I would advise even you get your divorce and your custody order here in the UAE. And if there are assets in the UK, then we can always take a financial order post-divorce in the UK. So that means you can really get the best of both worlds. But I would advise clients, to be careful if they go and they get advice that they should divorce in the UK, especially if there's not a huge amount of assets. Then you've got to be aware, is this particular lawyer looking at their own fees, or are they looking at your best interests? Because it's the best interests of the party that we're representing that we should always have in mind.
Yeah, of course. And so you mean it's an individual basis, really depends on...
It really, really is. So it depends if there are children involved, how long you are married, whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, have you got assets or are there minimal assets? All of these things need to come into play.
So you must hear a lot of sensitive stories from your clients. How do you emotionally detach when you're dealing with them?
Yes, it's something I guess I've learned over the years, Sandra, but it can be difficult, in very, very sensitive cases, and especially where children are involved. It can be very, very difficult to separate from that. But what I like to do, what I find is really good to get some downtime, is to get out in nature as much as I can. Mm-hmm. So I'm really pleased that the weather is getting better now. I love to go hiking in the mountains, so go to Rack or Fujairah at the weekends, and that's a really good way to detach from the stress of the job, shall we say.
Okay, makes sense. Well, thank you so much, Georgina, for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Sandra. Thanks for asking me.
That was very informative. So I'm sure our listeners have learned a lot from you today. So thank you, and hope to see you on the show again soon. Thank you for listening. I hope you found that insightful. Don't forget to share if you like the content, and stay with us for the next episode. See you soon.